Hi, I'm Michael Joy. Welcome to another reaction video. I want to say up front here, if you're a subscriber or catching this video randomly, just know that this is a mold making video. We make a lot of content here and I'm a professional mold maker, and so you may or may not want to be on this bus if you're interested in some other things. But for the makers out there, get ready. Hi, I'm Michael Joy. Welcome to another mold making video here at Shapeshifters TV. We run several lines of content. This mold making video is going to fall under our hand-ufacturing. Stay tuned for some upcoming videos where we're not just going to be critiquing the molds, we're going to be making some molds. But the critiquing is really useful because I'm not just going to say things to bash people. I'm going to say things that maybe elevate some of the content that we see. At least that's my hope. If you see me criticizing heavily on somebody who's not doing a great job, I haven't figured out how to do the workaround around that. I'm trying not to make this personal, just about the technique, but sometimes something's being done really wrong. I'll really only call it out if it seems to be a health hazard or something like that. But let's get into it. We're continuing with the plaster mold making, which is a specialty of mine years ago. Let's see. A one-part plaster mold. Sounds easy. Let's see what happens.
In the last video, we went ahead and made this mold.
So first off, if I were making any mold, I would make a mold of something that was interesting, maybe brought value, or was a component to another part. I get that molds for video instruction are really important. In fact, for the books that I wrote, I used plastic cups, I now use baby bottles, and I use them throughout the mold book in order to show different ways to do the same thing, because I didn't want to confuse people with the shape. I'm just like, oh, here's mold method one with the baby bottle, etc., etc. And so this may be for instructional, but there's no reason to have a mold of this. You can go to Home Depot and buy a terracotta planter.
Took this plastic container here and use it as a form.
He should have laminated work tables, not bare wood.
Using this plaster mold, we can then pour in slip and slip cast a pot and create pots like this.
Okay. For why?
This one here, I just pulled out of the mold and it's starting to set up. I think this is a great first mold to make. However, there's a few things I'd like to try and improve. The first
looks like a lumberjack.
Is the rim of the pot, the lip here. You can see there's a bit of an angle. That is all from the way the slip is absorbed into the plaster. So we pour the slip into the mold will suck out the water, but that also means the volume of the slip goes down. Let me show you that on another pot as well. So here is another mold. It's very similar.
This is basic stuff. Let me.
And pour the plaster this way. So now any bubble. How are we going to modify this form here?
Okay, here we go.
I'm going to use this pink foam here.
No, don't.
It's gotten relatively cheap. It's pretty easy to carve, and I think we can attach it.
Why would you do that?
Potentially, you could use
foam floats. You know, you're pouring liquid. You got to then stabilize things so they don't float. I would just use a piece of clay.
Several different things. I have used 3D printed objects before to extend a form, or potentially you can make it out of cardboard. This is where your arts and crafts skills can shine.
Oh, he's wearing a camera.
But I think
that's why he looks like a lumberjack.
And I think it will work relatively well. So what we're going to do is cut this out into a circle.
If I had something over my shoulders, it'd be to carry a cat.
The two together.
A shadow sling.
Off camera, I did just that. So here's a circle.
That foam's not easy to cut, actually. It's messy. The pink foam has a grain. It cuts one way very nicely and not the other. They sell special heated wires to cut things, so why bother with this? It's just not worth it.
It is maybe an inch bigger, a couple centimeters bigger than the edge of our form. So we'll have our pot form, and then we'll have this bigger area where the slip can sit.
I get it.
So as the slip drains, we won't impact the pot itself. So we need to go.
I need like the half fast forward button.
I'm going to use some silicone caulking here.
Oh my gosh.
Bead around the top. All right, so we'll just go ahead and attach that down.
It's not wrong. It's just
around and make that all nice and smooth. We want to make sure we have a really good seal here that it's all the way around.
It's just now he's created this buoyant issue. The cup is buoyant, the foam is buoyant. Now he's going to have to secure the foam down, and then every time you secure something, you have to unsecure it to clean up your shop.
Mold that we're trying to make, it would show up in the plaster. So next,
his table really should be laminated. Oh, I already said that. Never mind.
And if we did it this way,
don't do it. Don't do it.
Fit in our other bucket. I don't know. But as I said, we want to do this up.
I see where he's headed, and it's what we call exactly backwards.
And our bucket is definitely not big.
You do not build a mold in a form. You're too restricted.
Are working against us, so the bucket's flared out.
If you just have a square get those mold boards and just build a box around it. Piece of clay, you're like...
Shape. So we need something that's actually wider in the bottom.
I have to relax my face.
Be able to get plaster out.
I'm being too critical.
Actually do an upside down bucket. Even then, it's not big enough.
Oh my God.
And I don't know about you, but I don't know how to
You measure.
Just measure. So what are we gonna do about that? Well, so the next step in kind of the evolution of making molds is to go...
Not all mold makers are assholes, it's just me. Because I want to see the success. I want to see him get to it, you know?
Is smooth on one side. This is an old IKEA piece of furniture, so it's got that kind of plasticky laminate on the outside. And I've screwed a piece of wood. This is a 2x4.
Oh, those blocks are going to cause problems. You got to have C-clamps now for those blocks.
So we put one here and put one here. This one will go past the edge. We can put a clamp back here.
When you have a spring clamp, you just need to clamp this much. His 2x4 is now 3.5 inches, and his C-clamp has to be 3.5 inches plus 3/4 inches. It's too big. If you use C-clamps, then they get plaster on the threads and...
Of course, right now I'm just holding these in place. In a minute, I will go ahead and put the clamps on and show you how to do it for real. All right, so that's how we can get a form big enough for...
It's a disaster.
However, in my last video, I just went ahead and made a mold of this form, so I'm going to make a different mold. So off camera, I went ahead and did this one. So this here on top of the plastic planter, I went ahead and took a thin piece of plastic and put it over the holes that were in the bottom. And then, just like you saw me do, I went ahead and...
It looks so pretty, but it's not the best way.
Again, this foam has a taper.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a nice draft angle. I actually have a hole in this one, so I get my hand in here, get all the cotton.
You know, he could have cut a square. It wouldn't have mattered. It doesn't have to be round just because his vase is round.
Have it be tall enough. And then finally, I don't really want to do this on my bench, so I'm going to get a piece of wood to put down.
Okay.
So I can get all the plaster on. All right, so here is an old piece.
Still not a laminated piece.
For a while, we're going to repurpose it for the mold. Now I want to go ahead.
You got to soap those boards.
This to my bottom of my mold.
Okay.
This piece of wood here. To do that, I'm going to use some more silicone.
As suspected.
Pretty hefty bead.
He's going to glue this onto his board, and then his board is shot.
Here's one. I'm going to do.
Come on, nice guy. Don't make so much work.
And then I'm going to stick this down.
Got to drill a hole from the bottom of that board to help release the vent pressure
Make sure that silicone
when he pours over it. Okay.
Potentially I could ball up clay and stick it down, but I really want this to not float. So this here is an empty cavity. So
he should have positioned it more in the middle of his workboard. Now he's limited on the sides for his mold boxes. Why'd he crowd himself? Come on, guy. Okay.
Clamps.
He's got these clamps. Now you see those, they're just in the way now. These clamps are not free. His mold box is way too big. The other thing is when you use these clamps, you can't reduce the size of the box. You see how it's wonky?
All right, there we go.
It's not square. It's not square. This is like a nightmare to a mold maker. Not a square mold box.
The narrow sides. So off camera,
I'm having contractions.
My cottle boards.
All right, so he's cheating the box because he overbuilt the box. It's another extra amount of work. Cheating the box means you put in some filler.
A little bit more roundish and take up a little bit of volume. This is going to be a lot of plaster. I also went ahead and
way too much plaster.
Siliconed everything down. My last time I did a big plaster pour, it was a plaster disaster, so I'm going to be...
It was a plaster disaster.
Silicone might be a little bit overkill, but I had it and it was open, so I might as well use it. All the silicone has set up.
Oh my God, now we have
while it was doing so, I also
tape.
took some of my foil tape and prepped the rest
This
of the
guy does not want a plaster disaster. It's probably because the foam freaking floated.
Also went ahead and
I don't know. I would have liked to seen the film of that.
Space here, and I measured
I've done all these things. I've had molds that blam. You know, I'm sitting here sounding like a prick, but look, man, I've made every single one of these mistakes. It's just there weren't cameras around to see it.
0.7 grams of water.
Oh, Egyptian math. We skipped the Egyptian math.
So imagine you need
no.
a little bit, see if it leaks. Hopefully not.
Okay.
Try and miss the form.
Okay. It's a good pour. Bloop. Why'd he stop? What happened?
Take a look. No leaks so far.
Okay. So he's talked about plaster disasters, and yet he had a cordless drill right near him. If you are pouring plaster, get your tools out of the way if you're not stable with yourself with pouring plaster, because once that breaks, your plaster is going to connect to everything on your table. And he has an unlaminated table, so his whole table would be scraping. If that thing floated, he's done. Why'd he stop?
Now I'll rinse this out really quick and we'll mix it the second half of...
That's the problem with an overbuild. He should have had a bigger bucket to begin with. But this is what experience does. You're like, oh, I need a bigger bucket. It's kind of...
Somewhat counterintuitive.
Oh, that went in too fast. Look at his mixing stick on the side here. That's going to whip a lot of air in. Those are for aeration, actually. You do not want to mix with that.
So if you're mixing smaller amounts of plaster, a narrower and taller...
Oh, Egyptian.
So far, we don't have any leaks.
So far, we don't have any leaks.
That is the silicone.
He didn't even put clay. Oh, because he has tape on the inside.
Stuck down. And I didn't
Yeah,
show
oh, Murphy's. Why does Murphy's oil get all this press? Don't use it.
As a mold release on my pot form.
Dish soap.
This is starting to set a little bit already, but we should be
Potter's soap. Amazon is cheap. Oh, he didn't. Oh. If you've run out of plaster and you're halfway poured, you wait till the area that you ran out of gets like a soft yogurt. Then you take a fork and you scratch the heck out of it and you make this heavy, heavy texture. Then you let that plaster set and you pour water on it a little bit and let that plaster absorb the water. That way when you pour your next mix, it has a mechanical lock, but also the plaster from the bottom piece is not absorbing all the water out of your fresh mix, because if it absorbs the water out of your fresh mix, you're left with chalk on top. So he didn't score it, and I don't know how much time has passed. So this is not going to be a good lamination for this mold. It'll work, but it's not ideal. It looks like his mold box is not tall enough.
I'm going to need to fill this basically all the way to the top.
Oh man. Barely.
That's about as full as I can get it. This will take about half an hour to kick from the very beginning to the end. So we'll come back to it once it has set and do the demolding. It's been about 45 minutes since I finished pouring the plaster. It is starting to cool. I'm going to demold this in 2 steps. First, I'm going to take the collar boards off
Just
the
do
outside.
it. Just do it.
Break it free from this piece of wood on the bottom.
No talking. Do.
That way I can shape the outside edges. There's a lot of plaster here, and if I can lose weight at this point,
amusing to me.
I'm going to leave the pot on the inside.
That makes 1. Okay. Here we go. Don't put it there. Don't put it there.
There are all the clamps. Since we taped and siliconed this together, all the collar boards are still in place. Apply the pry a little bit.
The tape's gonna, see now the tape, he's secured his mold boards to the tape. Yeah. It's hard to watch.
There we go, that side's off.
Yeah, but
good.
now he's got now his, okay, you see what I'm seeing, right? It's got a mess. He's making a lot of work for himself. Okay. Okay, come on, buddy.
All right, there's all the collar boards. Next, let's see if we can get it to release from this board here.
Let's see if we can get it to release.
It is very stuck down.
Yeah, we know why it's stuck down.
There we go. So there is our well. It popped out, which is fine.
And his nice piece of plywood is shot.
But so far,
Plywood's not cheap, man.
Okay,
And you gotta cut it. Look at how messy that board is now. What happened just there? There's a big time period that...
I want to go ahead and clean up while it's still pretty soft. Nice thing about using the foam and the tape on the corners is that my edges are already kind of rounded off.
What? Where's the Sureform? Man, you'll just slide one of those in your hand and you'll never do that again.
If you wanted to, you could go
Talk to the guy who's done that.
A little bit more.
He shouldn't have been pushing. He should have been pulling on the side like a... I give up.
Cure for a while longer, and then we will try and pop out the form.
Mold making is not intuitive. If you got some guy barking like an old parrot over your shoulder, it is, but...
Let's see if we can go ahead and demold it now. Now we find out the importance of our mold release agent and our draft angles.
He did not need mold release on the cup. Plastic you do not need release on.
Let's see. I'm going to go ahead and go straight to air to see if I can get this release.
You just grab it with pliers and twist it.
That came relatively easy. And pull it out.
Okay. Oh, it's kind of a heavy... I thought it was thin plastic. I stand corrected.
Right, there's our mold.
Okay.
See a line.
A lot of work,
did the 2 different
but it looks good.
So that's not ideal. I don't feel any surface differences.
Oh, because where he layered it, there's a seam line. So you need to sand that out with some wet dry.
Very top. My guess is that some of the plaster got over the top of this, so it created an undercut. So when I pulled it off, it broke the plaster out.
No big deal.
However, it's not too bad. It is way better than the rim I had before. And at first look, I don't see any real bubbles in this, which is awesome.
Okay.
As you recall, we were trying to get rid of bubbles
Where are we in this?
the mold and trying to create a slip well so we can get a better rim.
Okay, he's gonna slip
Let's go ahead and
cast.
slip cast a pot in this new mold. And let's see if our improvements actually worked. So the idea is we'll just go ahead and...
You remember, Kay, how fast they make these with the jig machine? And you got this?
Too. That way we have...
You could have built that whole machine in the time, yeah.
Just dump it in.
Oh, that is... This is kind of clever. He's made his own slip casting table out of PVC, and slip casting tables, you want to keep the mold above anything that drips. They get messy like this, but it's PVC, it'll knock off, it'll wash. So I kind of like this idea, but I don't like that he's not keeping everything clean. But it's good to pour, always pour with something with a handle. That it's heavy.
On the slip well.
Okay, very nice.
So what's happening now is the plaster is going to start sucking the water out of the slip.
Yeah.
That will form.
All right, let me explain what's happening with slip casting in case you guys don't already know. In the liquid slip, there's molecules of clay, particles of clay, kind of like if you think about dirt. They are electrostatically, they're charged with what's called a deflocculant, which makes the water and the particles kind of slippery and glide over each other. So you can have a wet clay that doesn't settle. If you throw mud in a jar of water, it settles. This keeps it suspended because it changes this molecular charge in the casting slip. So when you pour liquid casting slip into a plaster mold, that plaster mold is a sponge, except that sponge has tiny, tiny holes. And what happens is now the slip is in the plaster, the water can migrate through the plaster wall because it's absorbing it. But what happens is the clay particles are like zinged against the mold wall, and they stack up, 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 they stack up. As this water is moving this way, it creates this microcurrent that moves the clay particles to the edge of the plaster wall. And so over time, it builds up what we call a skin, and then the excess is dumped out. So it creates, the water is drawn into the mold, it leaves a thicker layer, you drain it out. That's what's happening here in slip casting.
Against the walls. We'll need to let this sit for a while, and it's really a guess as to how long. This mold is actually dry now.
It's not a guess, it's about 15 minutes.
So I really don't know how long it'll take. Usually with my plaster and the molds that I make, I usually give it about half an hour. I'm gonna do that and we will see.
It's a simple shape, so you can see.
It's been sitting for long enough. The level of slip is definitely draining down into our slip well, which is great.
It's not draining anywhere, it's going into the mold, and the level is dropping because it's less water, less free water.
And do this off camera.
Okay.
All right, there we go, there's the pot.
He drained it.
There's still a little bit of slip down in here, so I'm gonna turn this over my table here. And
when he drained it, he should rotate the mold so it leaves an even coating inside.
Heavy. As drained.
Okay. All right. So he's going to peel off all this excess.
Let's go ahead and trim it. So I can get the part where I spilled.
You got to use plastic or wood. You don't want to cut that mold.
There's a shelf right here, so I can basically cut straight down to that.
All right. Whoosh, like a chef. Let's see how he does. Ooh, satisfying. Come on.
Take all that off.
I wanted one swipe.
All right, and there's the pot. So we got a nice pot that's formed.
Yeah.
It's not very thick, but
quarter inch. That's enough.
And it's probably
he's got a good clay body.
The mold itself. However, going around trimming it, I usually push the pot against the wall again.
Why?
I just take my fingers and slightly release it. Now, the real trick
if it has a slight undercut, just let it sit in the mold longer and it'll shrink off the wall. If you bend it in, you could distort your shape. Not a big deal here, but...
This mold is big and heavy, though.
Big and heavy mold. Didn't need to be that big. Okay.
There is our brand new pot, and it looks really good. I can see a
you can get it from IKEA for $5. It's a lot of work. I always say, if you're making a mold, make something that matters to you. This matters to him, but it's not a.
I have an old version of this that
it's not competitive to me.
So remaking it was really nice.
Let's see what he does.
Some of the flaws in that mold. All right, this is
looks like a totally chill dude, you know, but he's making a lot of work for himself.
But I want to show you the rim. So
the rim, why now?
There's a little bit of flash here at the
Okay.
top where we trimmed, but overall,
He's very thorough.
It's definitely something to be mindful of.
You just take a sponge.
And then the other thing we were fighting was bulk, which means finding something to hold the plaster. And building the cardboard structure is kind of non-trivial. And this resulting mold is
Okay,
huge.
we're gonna wrap this. Again, high five to anybody that's making a mold. Lower five to anybody that's making a mold slowly and inefficiently. but still, it gives a good commentary here. So his intention was to teach, maybe not through a guy like me's voice, but nonetheless, teaching is being done here. And I think that the moral of the story here that I would like to do is to say is don't overcomplicate the mold making, especially if it can be done faster. Things that float are your enemy in plaster, and also make a mold of something that's really interesting to you. If this is interesting to you, ignore my comment, but to me, I really like some dynamic that really shows the skill of the craftsperson, not something that can be store-bought. So he may be doing some tricks with glaze, but you know, that's what I got. Thanks for watching. There's more to come. Hand-ufacturing. Send us a link for mold makers you want us to critique. I'm trying not to be a jerk about this. It's not about the guy, it's about the work and the process. I want you guys to make great molds and to make a lot of money doing it, and this is why I'm barking at the inefficiencies. Thank you for watching this video. We're getting ready to launch a new platform called Hand-ufacturing. It's going to feature a lot more educational films about mold making and casting, from very basic to advanced mold making. Our hope is that it helps the business entrepreneurs out there learn efficient ways to manufacture their products and bring a lot more wealth into their household. Stay tuned.